Marcus died, thinking I would save him. Every day for 3 weeks while he sat in that federal detention cell, he told his interrogators the same thing. Call my friend at the airport. He'll tell you I'm innocent. We work together. Check the records. The FBI did call me 4 times. I never answered. Because I couldn't tell them the truth, that I was the one who stole his passport and sold it to criminals. That the TSA supervisor everyone trusts is running an identity theft ring. That Marcus's identity was used in a massacre because I needed $8,000. He died on day 21, heart failure during questioning. He was 27 years old, completely innocent, and he died believing his best friend would eventually tell the truth. I never did. Before I tell you who ordered this, and how deep the corruption goes, hit that subscribe button right now. What I'm about to expose will likely end my life. Federal agencies and criminal networks both want me silenced for different reasons. Subscribe because what happened to Marcus happens to innocent people every day when identity theft meets terrorism investigations. Turn on notifications. This isn't just my confession, this is proof that the people you trust with security are the ones selling your identity to the highest bidder. I was born in 1996 in College Park, Georgia, just minutes from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The airport was the center of everything in my neighborhood. Most families had someone working there in some capacity. It was the largest employer in the region, the economic engine that kept our community running. Growing up, I heard the planes constantly, saw them on approach and departure, understood that the airport was both promise and reality for people like us. Marcus Williams and I met in elementary school. We lived 3 blocks apart, went to the same schools, played on the same basketball teams. By high school, we were inseparable, the kind of friendship where you don't need to explain yourself, where showing up is enough. Marcus was a good kid, better than me in most ways. He stayed out of trouble, respected his mother, worked part-time jobs to help with bills. He had plans for community college, wanted to study aviation maintenance, dreamed of working on the planes instead of just loading them. After graduation in 2014, both of us needed work immediately. College wasn't realistic, we had families depending on us, bills to pay, survival to manage. The airport was the obvious choice. Marcus got hired first, as a ramp agent loading baggage onto planes. 6 months later, he helped me get hired into the same position. We worked side by side for the next 4 years, loading and unloading bags, working long shifts in Georgia heat and winter cold, earning just enough to get by. The work was hard and monotonous but stable. We developed a rhythm: show up, move bags, collect paychecks, repeat. We'd eat lunch together in the break room, complain about supervisors, make plans for days off that usually involved nothing more ambitious than video games and cheap beer. It was a simple life, but it was ours. Marcus was saving money slowly, still planning for that aviation maintenance program. I was just surviving, spending most of what I earned on rent, and trying to help my mother with her medical bills. In 2018, when I was 22, I got promoted to baggage handler with security clearance. The pay increase was modest but meaningful. More importantly, it gave me access to restricted areas of the airport, secure baggage areas, employee facilities, places where TSA and airlines stored sensitive materials. Marcus congratulated me, said he'd apply for similar positions soon. I felt proud, like I'd achieved something. The promotion brought me into contact with Dennis Crawford, a TSA supervisor who'd been at the airport for 15 years. Dennis was respected, competent, the kind of employee who knew everyone and how everything worked. He was in his mid-40s, always professional, often mentioned in employee meetings as an example of dedication to security. People trusted Dennis completely. Travelers, employees, management. He represented the face of airport security, the reassuring presence that made people feel safe. Dennis started talking to me casually during shifts, asking about my background, my financial situation, my ambitions. I thought he was being friendly, maybe mentoring. After a few months, he offered me additional work, nothing official, just some side jobs moving packages for extra cash. The jobs were simple: pick up a package from a specific location in the airport, deliver it to another location, don't ask questions, $500 per delivery, cash. I knew immediately it wasn't legitimate. But $500 was nearly a week's wages for a few hours of simple work. My mother needed medications her insurance barely covered. I was behind on rent. The temptation was overwhelming. I took the first job, then the second, then it became regular supplemental income that I rationalized as harmless. Moving packages wasn't hurting anyone, wasn't violent, was just a small deviation from rules that seemed arbitrary anyway. Over the next 18 months, I made approximately 60 deliveries for Dennis. I never opened the packages, never asked what was inside. Willful ignorance was my shield against guilt. The money helped me catch up on bills, helped my mother, gave me financial breathing room I'd never had. Marcus noticed I seemed less stressed about money, asked if I'd gotten a raise. I lied and said I'd picked up extra overtime shifts. In January 2023, Dennis called me to a meeting at a coffee shop off airport property. He explained that his operation was expanding into a new business line, identity documents. He had connections who needed passports, driver's licenses, social security cards, preferably from people with clean backgrounds who wouldn't be flagged in databases. As a baggage handler with security clearance, I had access to employee lockers, secure areas where people stored their personal belongings during shifts. The job was simple: identify employees with clean records, access their lockers during shifts, photograph or steal their identification documents, provide them to Dennis. Payment would be substantial, $8,000 per complete identity packet. One job could pay my mother's medical bills for an entire year. I resisted initially. Stealing packages felt abstract, victimless. Stealing someone's identity felt different, personal, harmful. But Dennis was patient and persuasive. He explained that the identities would be used by undocumented immigrants, trying to work, trying to survive, trying to build lives in America. Nobody would be hurt. The original person would report their documents stolen, get replacements, experience minor inconvenience. Meanwhile, someone desperate would get a chance at a better life. He framed it as almost humanitarian, a service that helped people while earning me money to help my family. The rationalization was weak, and I knew it, but $8,000 was transformative money. My mother's medications alone cost $600 monthly, even with insurance. I was drowning in medical debt, barely keeping my head above water. $8,000 wasn't just money. It was months of breathing room, the possibility of stability. I agreed. Dennis gave me specific criteria for target identification: employees with minimal criminal records, stable employment history, no red flags in background checks, preferably people who traveled infrequently and wouldn't immediately notice if documents were replicated. He wanted quality identities that could pass scrutiny if checked against databases. Over the next 6 months, I stole identification documents from 7 airport employees. I'd wait until someone was working their shift, access their locker using master keys I'd obtained, photograph their documents with my phone, and provide the images to Dennis. He'd arrange for forgeries or somehow obtain actual documents. I never asked the mechanics. Each theft earned me $8,000. I was making more from theft than from my legitimate job. The guilt was manageable when I didn't know the victims personally. They were just names, co-workers I barely knew, people who'd experience inconvenience but not catastrophic harm. I never stole from friends, never crossed that line, maintained that boundary, as if it made the crime ethical. Then Dennis changed the terms. In August 2023, he told me the operation needed a premium identity, someone whose background was so clean, whose profile was so unremarkable, that the identity could be used for high-stakes purposes, requiring deep scrutiny. Someone who'd pass enhanced background checks, whose name wouldn't trigger any alerts in law enforcement databases. The payment would be $20,000, but the identity had to be perfect. Marcus was perfect. 27 years old, worked at the airport for 9 years, never been arrested, no traffic violations, no debt issues, no problems with law enforcement. He didn't travel internationally, rarely even left Georgia, had a completely clean digital footprint. His identity was exactly what Dennis needed: invisible, trustworthy, unremarkable. I told Dennis no immediately. Marcus was my best friend, my brother in everything but blood. I'd steal from strangers, but never from him. There were boundaries I wouldn't cross regardless of money. Dennis's response was calm and final. He explained that I'd been stealing identities for 6 months, that he had evidence of every theft, security footage, text message records, financial transactions. If I refused this job, he'd provide that evidence to airport security and federal authorities. I'd be arrested for identity theft, conspiracy, and whatever federal charges applied to compromising airport security. I'd spend decades in prison, but if I cooperated with this final job, I'd get $20,000 and my freedom. Dennis would destroy all evidence of my participation. I could walk away clean with enough money to start over somewhere else. Marcus would experience inconvenience, reporting stolen documents, getting replacements, but would ultimately be fine. Nobody would get seriously hurt. The choice wasn't really a choice. Refusing meant prison, losing everything, destroying my mother's life along with mine. Cooperating meant money and freedom, at the cost of betraying my best friend in a way he'd never even know about. I took 3 days to make the decision. 3 days of not sleeping, of looking at Marcus during shifts and feeling sick, of constructing elaborate rationalizations for why this was acceptable. I told myself Marcus would be fine, that identity theft victims usually recovered quickly, that the inconvenience was temporary but my survival was permanent. On August 15, 2023, during a shift when Marcus was working on the tarmac, I accessed his employee locker. His wallet was in his jacket pocket. I photographed his driver's license, passport, social security card, and airport security credentials. The entire theft took 90 seconds. I returned everything to his locker, locked it, and walked away carrying images that would destroy him. I delivered the photos to Dennis that evening. He reviewed them, confirmed Marcus's background was exactly what the client needed, and promised payment within 24 hours. I asked what the identity would be used for. Dennis said it wasn't my concern, that I should forget about this job and never ask questions. The less I knew, the safer I was. The $20,000 appeared in my account as promised, deposited in small increments through what looked like legitimate sources to avoid suspicion. I paid off my mother's medical debts, paid 6 months of rent in advance, bought a reliable used car. The money solved every immediate financial problem I had, and Marcus never noticed anything wrong. His documents were still in his wallet, undisturbed, photographed but not stolen. For 3 months, nothing happened. I started believing I'd gotten away with it, that Marcus would never know, that my betrayal would remain invisible. I worked shifts with him, ate lunch together, complained about work like always. The guilt was a constant low-level presence but manageable when nothing had gone wrong. On November 12, 2023, there was a massacre in Juarez, Mexico, just across the border from El Paso, Texas. A rival cartel operation resulted in 17 deaths. A coordinated hit on a warehouse that went wrong turned into a bloodbath. Mexican authorities and DEA investigated the scene and recovered documents from one of the suspected shooters who'd been killed, an American passport belonging to Marcus Williams of College Park, Georgia. The FBI came to the airport 3 days later at 6 a.m. I was starting an early shift when I saw Marcus being escorted out in handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents. He looked confused, terrified, kept trying to explain something to the agents who weren't listening. Our eyes met for a second. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, looked at me like I'd understand what was happening and would help him. I looked away. The entire airport security team was brought in for questioning. FBI agents interviewed everyone who worked with Marcus, examined his employment records, searched his employee locker and workstation. They interviewed me, asked about Marcus's behavior, whether he'd traveled recently, whether he'd shown signs of radicalization or criminal involvement, whether I'd noticed anything suspicious. I told them Marcus was a good guy, reliable worker, had never traveled internationally to my knowledge, had no suspicious behavior. Everything I said was true. What I didn't tell them was that his passport had been stolen 3 months earlier, that I'd photographed it and sold the images to criminals who'd created a perfect forgery, that Marcus's identity had been weaponized by people he'd never met for purposes he'd never imagined. The FBI arrested Marcus on material support for terrorism charges. The evidence seemed straightforward. His passport was recovered at a cartel massacre site. His identity was used to cross the border multiple times in the months before the attack. Financial records showed suspicious transactions in his name. From the FBI's perspective, Marcus Williams was connected to cartel operations and terrorist activity. Marcus was held in federal detention pending investigation and trial. No bail. He was considered a flight risk and potential terrorist threat. His mother hired a public defender, who was immediately overwhelmed by the complexity of federal terrorism charges. Marcus maintained his innocence, insisted he'd never been to Mexico, said his passport was in his wallet at home, and he could prove it. Except when authorities searched his apartment, they found a passport, but forensic analysis determined it was a sophisticated forgery, planted to create an alibi. The real passport, federal investigators believed, had been used in Mexico and was now in evidence. Marcus's claims of innocence looked like exactly what a guilty person would say. Marcus kept telling his lawyer and interrogators to contact me. He said I could verify he'd been at work every day, that we had shifts together, that there were security cameras and time cards proving he'd never left Georgia. He gave them my name and number repeatedly, begged them to call me, said his friend would tell them the truth. The FBI did call me 4 times over 3 weeks. Each time I saw the federal area code on my phone, knew what they wanted, and didn't answer. I couldn't talk to them without either lying directly to federal agents or confessing my role in the theft. Either choice destroyed me. So I chose silence. Marcus died on December 2, 2023, 21 days after his arrest. The official report stated cardiac arrest during interrogation. He was 27 years old, had no history of heart problems, had been healthy his entire life. But 3 weeks of detention, interrogation, and what the report delicately called enhanced questioning techniques had stopped his heart. The FBI closed their investigation after his death. With the primary suspect dead, resources shifted to other cases. Marcus's death was classified as a tragic but unavoidable outcome, a terrorism suspect who died of natural causes while in custody. No charges against federal agents, no investigation into interrogation methods. His mother received his body and a death certificate. No apology, no explanation beyond the official story. I attended Marcus's funeral. His mother was destroyed, couldn't understand what had happened, kept asking how her son had become involved with terrorists and cartels. She asked me directly if I'd known anything, if Marcus had said anything, if there were signs she'd missed. I looked her in the eye and said I had no idea, that Marcus had seemed normal, that this was shocking to everyone. I carried his casket with 5 other pallbearers, co-workers from the airport, who'd known Marcus for years. The weight of that casket felt like every lie I'd told, every call I hadn't answered, every moment I'd chosen my survival over his life. We buried him in a cemetery in South Atlanta. His mother put his airport employee badge in the casket with him, said he'd been proud of that job, of working honestly, of building something legitimate. After the funeral, I tried to continue normal life. I showed up for shifts, did my work, avoided conversations about Marcus beyond expressing shock and grief. But the guilt wasn't manageable anymore. Every time I saw his empty locker, every time I worked a shift we would have worked together, every time I saw his mother's number appear in local news articles about wrongful death suits against federal agencies, the weight crushed me. 2 months after Marcus's death, Dennis called me for another meeting. He congratulated me on keeping quiet, said I'd handled the situation professionally. He offered me another job, a new identity to steal, another $20,000. The operation was expanding, demand was high, and I'd proven I could be trusted even under FBI scrutiny. I told him I was done, that I couldn't continue, that Marcus's death was too much. Dennis's response was predictable. I was too valuable, and knew too much to simply walk away. He still had evidence of my previous thefts, and now he had additional leverage. My failure to come forward during the FBI investigation made me an accessory after the fact to whatever crimes Marcus's stolen identity had facilitated. If Dennis was ever arrested, he'd make sure authorities knew about my role. My only safe choice was continued cooperation and silence. He gave me a week to think about it. That week I realized I was trapped in a system with no exit. Dennis controlled me through evidence and threat. The FBI would prosecute me if they learned what I'd done. Marcus's family would destroy me if they knew the truth, and my own guilt was eating me alive from inside. In March 2024, federal investigators reopened the Marcus Williams case based on new evidence from Mexico. DEA had arrested members of the cartel responsible for the Juarez massacre. During interrogation, one member mentioned that several American identities used in the operation had been purchased from a network in Atlanta that sold high-quality forged documents. The investigation began tracing that network. In May 2024, FBI raided Dennis Crawford's home and found extensive evidence of identity theft operations, thousands of stolen documents, forgery equipment, financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal proceeds. Dennis was arrested on federal identity theft, conspiracy, and fraud charges. The investigation expanded to identify his network of thieves and buyers. I wasn't arrested immediately. The FBI didn't have direct evidence connecting me to Dennis's operation yet. But I knew it was only a matter of time before Dennis traded information for leniency, before investigators traced the stolen identities back to the airport employees who'd facilitated the thefts. I had maybe weeks before federal agents knocked on my door. 2 weeks after Dennis's arrest, FBI agents did knock. They asked me to come to their office voluntarily for questions about Dennis Crawford and Marcus Williams. I could refuse and wait for a warrant, or I could cooperate now. They made clear that cooperation would be viewed favorably when charges were filed. At the FBI office, they laid out what they knew. Security footage showed me accessing employee lockers during times when those employees later reported identity theft. Financial records showed unexplained cash deposits into my accounts. Dennis's records, once decrypted, showed my name connected to multiple identity theft transactions. And most damning, they determined that Marcus Williams's identity was stolen using methods consistent with insider access at the airport. They offered a deal: full cooperation, testify against Dennis and provide information about the broader network in exchange for reduced charges and possible immunity. If I refused, I'd face decades in federal prison for identity theft, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice related to Marcus's case. But there was a condition that made cooperation unbearable. To receive immunity, I'd have to provide testimony explaining exactly how Marcus's identity was stolen and used. That testimony would become public record. Marcus's family would learn that I was responsible for his death, that his best friend had sold him to criminals, that every moment he'd spent in that cell believing I would save him was time I'd spent hiding. I'm cooperating. The trial starts in 6 weeks. Dennis Crawford faces 127 counts of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. I'm a government witness. My testimony will detail the airport-based theft operation, the network of buyers, the methods used to steal and forge documents. I'll testify under oath about stealing Marcus Williams' identity and selling it to Dennis, about the phone calls I didn't answer, about watching my best friend die rather than confessing my crime. I'm also facing charges reduced from decades to 5 years in federal prison as part of my cooperation agreement. My testimony ends my career, my reputation, my freedom, but worse than any prison sentence is knowing that Marcus's mother will learn the truth, that the friend who carried her son's casket was the one who put him in it. I'm 28 years old. I stole my best friend's passport and sold his identity to criminals who used it in a cartel massacre. When the FBI arrested him for terrorism, I received 4 phone calls asking me to verify his innocence. I never answered. He died in federal custody, 27 years old, completely innocent, tortured to death, because I needed money, and chose his life as the price of mine. This confession exists because Marcus's story needs to be told. The FBI will present my testimony as cooperation with justice. But this is the full truth. Marcus Williams died because his best friend betrayed him, because airport security officials run criminal networks, because identity theft enables terrorism investigations to destroy innocent lives, because federal interrogation methods kill people, because my survival mattered more than his life. If this opened your eyes to how identity theft really works, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell. This story matters because it shows how trusted security officials use their positions to commit crimes, how identity theft isn't just financial fraud, but can lead to terrorism accusations and death, how federal investigations destroy innocent people while actual criminals walk free. Hit that like button. Every like pushes this truth to more people. The algorithm doesn't care about justice, but it responds to engagement. Force people to see how identity theft enables false terrorism charges, how airport security is compromised from within, how innocent people die in custody, while the real criminals testify for reduced sentences. Share this everywhere. Marcus Williams' family deserves to know the truth. Airport employees need to know their identities are being stolen by their supervisors. Travelers need to know the people running security are selling identities to criminals. Your share might reach someone before they make the choices I made, before they sacrifice a friend for money, before they let an innocent person die rather than confess. My real name is Terrell Washington. Marcus Williams was my best friend since elementary school. He was 27 years old when I sold his identity to criminals. He died in FBI custody while I ignored his calls for help. Dennis Crawford is on trial for running the identity theft network, but the real murderer is walking free as a government witness. That murderer is me. If you're being pressured to commit crimes by someone with power over you, understand that cooperation doesn't equal safety. They'll use you until you're no longer useful, then discard you or use you as leverage when they're caught. There's no exit from these systems except prison or death. Get out before you destroy someone you love. Get a lawyer. Contact the FBI. Testify first. It's the only path that doesn't end with you burying your best friend while lying to his mother. Marcus, I know you died thinking I would tell them the truth. You spent 3 weeks in that cell believing your friend would eventually come forward, would verify your innocence, would save you. You died believing in me. And I let you die because I was too much of a coward to face the consequences of what I'd done. You deserved a friend who would risk everything to save you. Instead you got me. Someone who sold you for money and watched you die for it. TSA Supervisor Dennis Crawford is on trial. I'm testifying as a cooperating witness. Marcus Williams is dead. And somewhere in Atlanta, his mother still doesn't understand how her honest, hard-working son became connected to cartel massacres. In 6 weeks she'll learn the truth in a federal courtroom. She'll learn that the young man who cried at her son's funeral is the one who killed him. The identity theft continues. The airport security continues. The trusted officials continue running criminal networks. And innocent people continue dying for crimes committed in their names while the actual criminals negotiate reduced sentences by testifying against each other.